Okay, hey everybody, how you doing today? It's been a couple weeks. I hope you all had a great holiday season and New Year. I'm ready to start back and hit this year running. But let's go ahead and just jump right into it. So on Tuesdays, I try to do a simple programming or game design challenge that we can finish in one day. So that's what the goal is today. We're going to do just a simple board game in Unity using the data-oriented programming. So basically the rules are just going to be just 2 players, probably both controlled by a player. It's not going to be online or anything, so it can be like hot seat multiplayer if we really want to. If I have time, I might try to add AI. We'll see. And then we want to be able to have a sequence of board spaces. So basically you want to be able, kind of like Candyland or something like that, you want to be able to have a number of board spaces and be able to specify the order that players would move on them. And then we'll want to have start and end goal spaces. And then I'll want to have a move die. If I have time, I'd like to make you be able to actually roll a die and see what number it lands on, but we might just have to rely on a just displaying the number that the generator chooses. And then also I like to have this one rule that if you land on the space of another player, you can send them back to the start, just to have a little bit extra options there. So I kind of wrote out some simple implementation just for me. It's obviously it's not a very difficult game because we only have 2 hours to make it, but I'm gonna implement the board using mono behaviors. So we'll just create objects in space here. I guess we can go ahead and get started. So I'm just gonna create, this project is basically is the default Unity 2019.3. I have already installed a couple packages, mostly the entities because we're going to be using the entity system, the lightweight render pipeline, also known as universal render pipeline. And I'm not planning to use any of the rest of these. I just didn't delete them. And then I went ahead and created the render pipeline, which you just right click on assets and say create rendering pipeline. And I brought a couple script classes over from another project of mine, which I'll talk about once they become relevant. But yeah, so I just made a simple mono behavior for the board, and we'll start with that. And then let's just place one space at the 0, 0 position in the game world. I'll just call this start player 1. Okay, and probably we're going to want to let this have some type of prefab. So let's go ahead and create, sometime down the line we'll probably want to give this better graphics, but for now I'm just going to use a simple, I guess a plane is fine. Alright, and I'm going to parent it to the start, parent it under the start player 1 object. Okay, and I think I'll move the Z down just slightly so that if a piece is standing on this space, it won't be like inside of it. And then let's create a material. So I think I'll put it in another folder. And I'm gonna create material. Let's just, yeah, the simple lit on the universal pipeline. And I think all I'm gonna do is set this to blue. And let's call this player 1 color. And then if I just drag that material onto this object. Okay, so now it's blue. Guess it's getting probably some from the ambient light, so it's fine. I'm not gonna... I know we probably won't get to work too much on the visual aspects of this project today, but I want to at least give us something to work with. And while we're here, let's shrink this. Okay. Okay, so if I duplicate it and then... Okay, so it looks like their radius is about, well, the diameter is about 5, or is 5 units. So if I wanted to make it 1 unit... Let's see. So I guess it was 10 units wide originally, so I need to put the scale to 0.1. Right, now if I just move this over 1 unit, now they touch. Okay, so I think that's going to work a little better. Okay, so before I do anything else, I'm going to go ahead and create a mono behavior for this piece. And I already have the board game space. And it works pretty much just like a normal mono behavior, but this iConvert game object to entity class is going to... Unity, when it sees this, will automatically pass information about, like, it's already has created an entity for this object, as well as given us the manager for the entity. So it's pretty easy to just add the components that we'd want to that entity to represent this mono behavior. So I need to go ahead and create the entity, and I like to do that in its own separate script. So let's just... I think this game is going to be simple enough. We can just have a components file here, and that will be fine. It won't actually have that class, so let's just get the namespace. Okay. Alright, only 10 minutes in and my voice is already starting to go. I was really happy I didn't get sick at all this winter. I usually do, but my allergies have been kind of bad, so maybe that's my karma or something. Guess I'd rather have that than full-on sickness, but... Alright, so... Okay, I'm just going to call this a board space. Let's see. So we'll definitely need the world position of this space, because that's what we'll set the space to. And then... Okay, so... I want to think of everything that a space has in common. Let's see, I think I actually wrote down, so... Oh yeah, so they will have, like... Okay, so really all this... I think all that a space component has is just the position. But what else? For some reason the indention's being a little weird. So I know we're going to want to have board... or... Well, a space... neighbor. Maybe I can just get... Well, that just a space. Oh, and I also forgot, this should say iComponent data. So that Unity knows we want to use this on the entity system. Okay, and so this would basically just take two spaces and say that they're a neighbor. So I guess how do I want to... refer to this space. I guess they'll need to have some kind of... Well, I guess I could do it two ways. I could either have an entity, but I don't really like doing that. Like I could say from space, and then I have another one for to space. I think it'd be better if each space also has an ID, so... And every, yeah, neighbor is probably not the best way to say this, because it'd be more like, yeah, because you can move, because they're directional, because if you can move forward, you might not be able to move backwards, so need to do that. Okay, I think that's good. So yeah, these will have entity for spaces, which will basically just have information about their position, and then we'll have an entity for each move. And then let's see. I think that's all I have to do for now. I guess we'll also want to be able to tag a space if it's like a start position, so starting space. Okay, and then we'll just have, I don't know, the player. And I think that's really all we'll need for now. So this mono behavior should also have information about if it's a starting space or not. Okay, so let's say starting space, and then I guess a starting player should be private. And then we'll also want to have a list of all moves. The easiest... I'm just thinking about the best way to do this, because I don't really want to do something super complicated. Because I'd like to have a list of like board game spaces. For all the spaces that this space can move to. The only problem is we need to somehow get the ID, and if this space hasn't been created yet, we don't really know that. Okay, so let me think here. Probably the easiest way to do this we'll be able to assign each of these board game spaces an ID at some point as needed. Alright, well, let's not worry about that just yet. Let's go ahead and just set up this entity. So we want to add a component, which will just be space. And there'll be a new space, and then I guess we do have to know the ID at this point, but I'll just put 0. And then the position is just the transform of this object. Does that work? Okay, it does. Wasn't sure if Unity would automatically convert from float 3 to, or from vector 3 to float 3, but it does. What's it complaining about? No, add component takes 2 arguments. Really? What does it want then? Okay, so that's funny. If I specify the type, I can't also... Oh, okay. let's see here. So I guess add component, they don't want you to set the data at the same time, which is a little... thought I'd done that before. Oh, it's probably add component data. Is that right? Yeah. Okay, so that is, yeah, this stuff is still in beta. I think that they're going to probably remove the just add component. Anyway, I seem to have that issue a few times. Alright, so if we do this, Unity should see this, or yeah, first we have to add the mono behavior to it, but what is it called? Board game space. Yeah, we don't use any of that information for now, but if we play, it'll take a little bit to load. Oh yeah, and I need to actually show the entity debugger. Okay, yeah, so we can see our entity here. Oh, that's not it actually. It's the world time. Okay, so did it not work? Thought that Unity would just automatically call this convert. Alright, let's make sure that I'm not doing something wrong and that Unity does call this. If not, I might just do something a little bit more simple for now. Yeah, I've noticed that since Unity updated, compile and especially play times are a lot slower. There is a way that you can try to fix it, but it's kind of buggy sometimes, but I might go ahead and implement it or turn it on. Okay, so I guess it's not going to automatically uncall this convert. Maybe, oh yeah, isn't there like a... Okay. I don't want it to destroy, so let's try this one more time. So I had to add this convert to entity mono behavior. I forgot about that step, and I think it is what calls the convert method. Yeah, so now we got this converting message there, and now we can see start player 1 is here, and it has the space. Okay, so it already has this position, but I'm not sure. Oh, well, it's 0, 0, 0. Okay, so that's why. Yeah, I was gonna say that it looks like this information is just the default, but that's because the start player 1 is on position 0. Oh, hi Hypnotwist, how are you doing? Thanks for stopping by. I guess we can test this out if I create a second one and just move it over. You should see the position also update. And if that's the case, we don't really need to have the world position in the actual space entity. Yeah, okay, so the duplicate's here, and then yeah, the position is good. Okay, well then yeah, I guess we don't need to worry about this world position, so I'll just get rid of it. We don't really need the rotation information and stuff in the space, but I mean, it doesn't cause any problems. Okay, so what I want to do now is create a prefab out of this start player 1, and then I can update it when I want to add better graphics or whatever. When did I start? I'm assuming the stream. Stream was about 15 minutes ago is when I started programming. Hasn't been too long. Okay, so I'm going to make a prefabs folder here. And then if you just drag a game object into the folder, it will create a prefab for you. I want to rename this to just be let's see. Well, I guess okay. You can leave that. Oh, how long have I been programming? Oh, pretty long time. I started when I was in junior high teaching myself. It's been probably 15 years or something. Okay, so I'm gonna rename this to just a board space. And then I want to make a prefab variant of this so that I can use it as the player 1 start. Just in case I want to change anything in the future. So let's delete that and then just recreate it up here. Do I do this full time? I do program full time. Not necessarily game development, but okay, so I think this is all pretty good. This is in C#, and that is usually what I use as well at work, but yeah, I've learned a bunch of different languages. Okay, so I think that's all set up. Is it centered? It looks like it's not centered. Oh. Oh, right. Okay, I always forget this. And in Unity, the Z axis is not up and down. So if I want this to be a little bit below the plane, I need to change the y-axis. So I just went to the prefab view to do that, and now it will be updated here as well. When did I learn Unity? I think it's been about 5 years is when I started learning it. Yeah, I think that's about right. How come some people's Unity looks different? Oh, I'm using the newest version, and they just redid the interface, so that's why some of the style is different. Maybe I bet a lot of people probably haven't updated yet because it just came out of beta about a month ago. The paid version, oh, it has a dark mode, but that's really the only graphical difference that I know of. Alright, so now what I want to do, I need to place a couple more spaces and then position them around the board. Okay, let's make another variant here. Let's do a couple of materials first, actually. So this will be the player 2 color, and I'll set that to red. That's fine. Oops. Do I like Unity? Yeah, I've been using it for a while, so I am a little biased, but in general, I think it does a good job. They've been updating a lot of their systems lately too, which is a little bit difficult to keep up with, but I think once everything settles, it should be a lot better than what they have currently. Alright, so I just created a red material for player 2, and I'm gonna do a grayish. Yeah, I guess gray is fine. So grayish for just a neutral space. Oh, the new Unity. I mean, I think that the new UI style is a little boring, but I guess it is. Oh, what's the word? I guess utilitarian, but trying to think what new features. Oh, there's a new input system in the newest version, and yeah, that's really good. I won't be using it in this project though, just because it takes a little bit to set up. I like to do a whole stream on that later. Alright, so that one's gray, and now we can see this one turned to gray because I changed the base prefab, so I want to go into the player one's variant and then change it to blue. And oh yeah, they're on top of each other, so that's why that's going on. Okay, so yeah, now the player one is blue and the neutral space is gray. So let's make another variant of this for player 2. Yeah, prefab variant, and this will be the player 2 start space. And I just want to change the material here to the player 2 color. And that's all I have to do. And now I'll just drag that onto the board. Okay, let's just move it over here. So they'll both just kind of pop onto the board at this point. Oh, what's new about it? Yeah, I was trying to remember all the features. I think the biggest thing, like I said, is that they have the new input system, which lets you, I think the biggest thing about it is you can change keybinds and stuff while the game is running, which used to you had to kind of roll your own system to do that. So that's pretty nice. Let's see, what else? I don't want to have too many spaces here because I want to make this a little easier to test. Let's just have them go in a circle, and then we'll put the end space. Oh, what's new about the input system? Oh, okay. Yeah, the main thing is keybinds, and they have better support for controllers and being able to detect what controllers are active. Let's make this a little bit more interesting. I was gonna say maybe red moves around that way and blue moves around that way, but that's gonna change. Let's not do that actually. Alright, and then I'm gonna put the end space right here, which I don't have something for that yet. Yeah, and then the new Unity version also, yeah, they updated the rendering system, but it's basically just a renaming of the what used to be the lightweight pipeline. They have changed it to the universal render pipeline, but I don't think it's that different. Okay, let's just call this the ending space. And oh, I don't need to rename it. I want to recolor it to green. And then I need another prefab variant for that. You know how when you add a new version of Unity you pick modules. Does that mean if I enable mobile or something, then I could build and add to mobile? Oh yeah, so if you want to build your game for a mobile version, yeah, you have to make sure that you have the download for that system, or yeah, I guess the module enabled and installed. So for instance, right now I just have the standalone, But yeah, if you wanted to build Android or iOS, you'd have to have that checked when you install it. Where's the ending? Okay, there we go. And now that's set up. So I'll just move this. Oh, I was clicking on the material. I wanted the prefab. Okay, so now we've got a really simple board here. So basically, player 1 will start here and move around the board to try to get to the end. Player 2 starts there and does the same. So now we want to set up neighbors. We should maybe have branching path, shouldn't we? So it's a little bit more interesting. But the shape I've chosen here isn't that good for that. Let's do something. Spending way too long on this, but that's alright. And let's just have a couple more. And I'll move this. Okay. So yeah, that's good enough for me. Is it a 2019.3? Yeah, that's correct. That's what I have right now. 2019.3 and then I think 0F. But I think that might be the only one actually. Alright. So let's rearrange this a little bit. Okay, so now we can see. I'll go ahead and set up some of the values here. And then I guess I need to have something for the ending. Oops. I have to recompile. Okay, and then we'll have a boolean here for the ending space. It's got to compile again. That's alright. Alright, and so for the ending space, we just check that. Okay, and now for each of these, I need to set up the moves. So this one only has one move to this space. Oh no, it's actually to this one. Okay, that got... It'd be nice if I could rename these somehow to make it a bit more obvious what they are. So let's just take some time to do that. So, okay, I'll say this is rows. So this would be like row 0. So this is row 1. Or let's just call it like the space 1, 1. It's 1, 2, 3. Again, I'm spending way too long on this. Okay, so this would be something like, I don't know, 3A, or let's just call it 3 left. How about? Actually, wouldn't it be 4? But and so this is 5 left, and 6 right, 7, 5 right, Wow, this one got all the way to the bottom, but this is space 1. And this is 6 left, and 8. And space 9. Okay, I think that will help make things a lot easier to test later. I'll just sort these real quick. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. Okay. So yeah, let's start one space and move to space number 1, and the player 2 start space can move to space number 1 as well. Space 1 and go to space 2, 2, 3, and then 3 can go to 2 different spaces. 4 left, 4 right. And then left can go to 5 left. Same there. Did I just... Okay, no, I thought I clicked the wrong thing there. 5 can go to 6. And then 6, both left and right, converge on space 7. And 8, 9, and finally the ending space, which has no moves. What's this game about? Oh, I'm just making a simple board game, so players will be able to start on any of the... Well, player 1 will start in blue, player 2 will start on red, and then they'll roll the dice and just try to get to the end. I'll try to finish it today, but I'm taking too long on this graphical stuff, but... Yeah, just trying to do a small project for today, just to, because somebody asked how to do like a basic board game, so. Alright, so if it's starting space, I want to add the starting space component. And I need to also put the starting player in there. Oh, again, it's add component data, not just add component. Okay, and then we need to do something similar if it's an ending space, but I don't think I have the... the component set up for that. So we'll just create that real quick. So again, we'll add the component data for our ending space. And this one doesn't have any data, so I can just leave it like that. Okay, so now I need to figure out how I'm going to do the moves. I think what I'll do is I'll create a separate object for that. This will just be, I don't know, move initialization manager. Did I spell that right? Yeah, I think so. Okay. And the problem here, it's not really a problem, but the thing that we need to remember here is that, actually, maybe I will make it a mono behavior. We need to keep a list of all the board game spaces that have been created so that we know, so that they have a consistent ID. So to do that, I'll just have dictionary of, oh yeah, I need to get the collection namespace so that the right thing shows up, of board game space objects, just to an integer, and then whenever we receive a new space, then we'll try to assign it a number. If it doesn't exist, otherwise we'll look it up in this dictionary. Okay, so this will have, I don't know, get space ID, return an integer. Okay, so I think I named this badly. Let's just rename it to, I don't know, space registry or something. Because what it's actually gonna do, like another way I could have done this is I could have like manually assigned an ID for each board game space in this mono behavior. But I don't really want to do that because that would make it prone to having duplicates or me making a mistake. So I'd rather have this class that does it. So anyway, how we do it is we'd say if spaces try get value, and what this does is if there's no value for the space in the dictionary, it will return false. But if there is something, it will return true and then give us the value in this variable. So if it's true, we can just return ID. If it's false, then we just need to assign an ID to the space, and we don't really care what number. So I can just do something like ID equals spaces count, which basically means that each ID will be consecutively added, because the count is however many spaces are in the dictionary. Oh yeah, so I can just does that one. It was complaining because ID was already initialized up there. So then we'd say that we need to assign this, so spaces equals ID, and then we return it. Okay, so I think I'm happy with that. So here, first we want to get a reference to the space registry object, which we can do by calling find object of type. This is a little slow, so if we wanted to, we could just have this reference be stored up here. But this way we don't have to worry about doing that. And this is only called when the game first starts up, so I'm not really worried about it being too slow. So we need to get the ID here, so we do something like registry. Actually, let's just store this space ID equals registry get space ID for this object, because we'll need it later. So, and then if moves length is greater than 0, then we'll want to create more entities for each possible move. So to do that, we can just do move entity equals the manager, and then we'll tell it to create an entity. I guess we should pass it an archetype, but oh yeah, we definitely should pass an archetype because we might create multiple moves. So an archetype is just lets Unity know like the default data layout for a component, or not a component, an entity, so that it doesn't have to like try to fit the entity into its system multiple times, because you already have told it like what kind of data it's going to hold all at once. So we'll create the archetype, and we're just going to have space move. That's all I think it's going to contain. And then we do for each neighbor and moves. So first we create the entity. Oh, that was confusing it. And then we would assign the data type to that entity. So again, manager dot set component data. Yeah, this time the component's already been added, so we would just set it. Oh, I actually don't have to give it. So move entity and then new space move, and from is this space ID. And 2 is the ID for our neighbor. Okay, so yeah, again, the reason we have to do this is because we don't really know the order that these spaces will be loaded. So we have to have some outside class keep track of the IDs for the spaces based on their mono behavior. So that way they'll be consistent between each space. So I guess I should just add that registry class here. And okay, so let's just try and play and see what happens. Actually, nothing will happen, but I want to see what entities are in the system. We haven't actually added any gameplay yet, but okay, so we have. It's funny, these entities don't have any components, apparently. Okay, so I guess these were all supposed to be the move entities, but for some reason... Did I do it wrong? Because it's saying that there are like entities that had no data types assigned to them. But I have the set component data right there. Oh, did I get an error? Okay, that was the problem. Yeah, I should probably have this also moved. So a component with type space move has not been added to the entity. Oh, I didn't pass the archetype into the create entity function. Okay, so that was the issue there. Okay, so let's try this one more time. Alright, so no errors, which is always a good sign. Okay, and then we have all these, which are moves. So from space 0 to 1, 2 to 0. So that makes me think that those are start spaces. 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 2. It's kind of hard to visualize these. Let's make this a little easier just to debug. I'll have something here, private int debug ID. So we shouldn't set this, but this will basically just hold the space ID here. Oops. That way we can kind of cross-reference whenever I make a little change like that. It has to recompile everything. Alright, so let's see. So from 0 to 1. So this is actually space 14. That's kind of interesting. So what is ID 0? Okay, so ending space 0 goes to 1, which is right. And then 2 also goes to 0, which is right, yeah. So 9 goes to 10. Or 8 goes to 9. Yeah, they got the order mixed up of how we would expect it, but... So 3 goes to 4, which is right. Okay, so it's looking correct so far. 8 goes to 4. Yeah. And 14 goes to 5. So that was 14, and that one's space 5. Okay. So I'm thinking I don't see any errors so far. I mean, we could go through each one, but again, we're a little stuck for time. Okay, so now we've got that ready. We can actually start on some more fun things, I think. So, let's see here. Okay, I mean, we could just have like some screen that says ready to play. Maybe we'll add that later, but I think I'll skip it now just for time. So, well, the board game will basically just start up right when you press play. Let's go ahead and make some pieces. Okay, so let's just do a 3D object. Capsule's fine. Actually, I'll parent it under an object piece. This will start at 0, 0, and then the capsule is way too big, obviously. So let's actually put the piece over a spot so we can see how the capsule looks in reference to a board space. Okay, let's make it smaller. I also don't need any collision, so I'll remove the collider. Okay, move it up a little bit. And give it the player 1 color. Okay, and I'll go ahead and make this prefab. And then I'll have a variant. Let's see. Create prefab variant, and this will just be the player 2 piece. I should rename this one to player 1 piece. If I can click in the right spot. Right, and the player 2 piece, we just want to go into the prefab editor and change it to the player 2 color. And that's it. Okay, so now if I drag this onto the board, all set up. Okay, I don't really need to worry about the position of it because the game board will probably just position the piece for me. But yeah, we'll go with that. And okay, so I'm going to have some components that will be basically just used for game flow, and so let's just have let's just call this the turn phase. So this component will just be placed on like a command entity, and we'll just tell the game that we're in the turn phase. I'm also going to have I guess a piece component data, and it will just have the player ID. I'm going to cut it. I kind of want to place this above the flow components. So this will just have player. I don't think I need to have anything else. Well, actually, it will need to have its location, so okay, so that's good. And then what about like a structure for the player itself? I'm not sure if this specific game would need it, but other games that have like a score or something would. So I'll leave this out for now. Okay, so let's make another component that will take these pieces and insert them into the entities system. Let me open up the window while it was compiling. Okay, so I'm going to call this game piece. Alright, so first we give it a namespace. Don't need any of this stuff. This is thankfully going to be a pretty simple class. Said I don't need it. So I convert game object to entity. Oh yeah, this is actually a comma. So well, it's just the same as the game board, but really all we're going to need to do is just insert in the player ID. Okay, so when the game first starts, we will need to be able to set the piece to the starting spot. We'll also need to be able to do that if the piece gets moved. I'm not sure, like if the piece gets moved back to start. I'm not sure exactly how we'll handle that, but we'll just deal with that when it comes. So yeah, add component data, entity, new piece, and just have the player ID, and then okay, so we don't really know the space at this point, so we can just leave it. I don't really like doing that, but I think it will be okay for now. And then yeah, we want to have a class that will move this piece back to the start space. Let's go ahead and create some systems. So maybe instead of like a system that does that, because we kind of just want to be able to have something we can call to find the start space. Not that that's really that difficult to do. So let's just create a simple class to do that. If the board game has a whole lot of spaces, it might get kind of slow because we'll have to search through them all. But, I mean, there's not a whole... I mean, it's only going to be called a few times. Oops. Okay, so let's see, find start space. Namespace, game logic. Okay, so what this does, again, it's just going to be static class. Doesn't return void, actually, it returns an integer. Okay, so what I'd want to do here... This is, okay, so what I'm trying to think of is that we can't search through the start spaces, right, like, when we're adding this component, because the spaces might not have all loaded, so we're gonna have to wait at least a little bit. Okay, so let's go ahead. Let's add initialization phase. So what this will do is basically figure out what spaces or what pieces should exist. So yeah, I think kind of working on this backwards, because we wanted to start with, like, okay, so what I was thinking of, we'd start with the spaces already created on the board, but probably how it should actually go is the game looks at what spaces are on the board and then creates a piece for every start space. So yeah, instead of having the spaces already exist, we want to have some system that looks at the board and then creates a space or a piece on each board. Alright, so let's so I'll go ahead and delete these actually. Let's just have a game object, and this will just be the pieces. And so I'm just gonna, no, not that. I want to delete game piece. Yeah, we don't need this. So I want to have a class that will basically just hold game pieces as they're created. And this is mostly because you can't really add a mono behavior to an entity, but like the model and everything is still a mono behavior. Sorry. Okay. Yeah. So this will stay a mono behavior, and what I want to do is this will just have, I guess, a list. Game objects. And then yeah, some other class will come and add things to this list as needed. Okay, so now we're going to make our first entity system, and this will just be the board initialization system. Well, let's just be even more specific. It's just going to initialize the pieces. Okay, and this is going to be a component system. Could make it a job component system. Maybe we will. That'll be a little bit more fun. Put it in the namespace. Game logic. Right, and get rid of that. Okay, now we gotta tell it to implement the abstract class. Okay, so if you've never seen a job system before, basically what you do is you schedule jobs in this class, and the jobs will run on a different thread sometime in the future, but before the end of the next frame. And that's kind of like how like the fundamentals of the Unity's entity system. And it's really good because it lets a bunch of code run kind of in parallel, or actually literally in parallel if you have a multi-core computer. Okay, so this will be the initialization system group. Okay, and our job is actually really easy to set up. Find pieces worker, and all you have to do is tag it as an iJob. We can actually do it this way. So iJob for each, and we want this job to run for every starting space. Okay, so what this does is when you schedule this job, Unity will run this execute function once for every starting space. Okay, and really that's all we need. Well, we need the space, not the actual starting space, because the starting space, well, it has the player ID, so we need both. Okay, and so what we do is we basically need to tell the entity system to create an entity, a space entity on top of each of these. To do that, we have to have something called entity command buffer. And this concurrent just means that it can run in a multi-threaded environment. And what an entity command buffer does is it takes commands having to do with adding entities or changing the data on them and runs them all at once at a later date. And the reason you want to, I guess not a date, at a later time. And the reason you want to do that is because the entity system is a lot faster if it can do things like that in bulk. So, oh yeah, also another thing you can do is if you tag these as read-only, Unity can optimize how it schedules jobs a little better. And we'll be able to tag these as read-only because we're not changing any of the data inside. Okay, so all that out of the way, you can basically just create the piece entity equals buffer dot, oops. Create entity, oh yeah, we do want to have an archetype again, so entity archetype. That's okay, and then also, okay, I did forget one other thing. When you have a entity command buffer, it wants you to also pass an index, and that's so that no matter how the computer decides to run these different threads, Unity can execute these commands in a consistent order every time you play the game. In order to do that with an iJob for each, you need to actually call the iJob for each with entity, and that will give you information about the entity and the thread, or I guess the entity index. So we'll just go ahead and move this over. We won't actually use the entity, but it doesn't really cause any issues. Why is it not like that? Oh yeah, because I needed to pass the index. Okay, and now we need to set the data on there, so set component index entity and then new piece, and the piece has the player, which we can get from the starting space, and also the space, which we can get from the space. That's a little confusing. We need to get the space ID from the actual space component. Okay, so that's all we have to do here. I can also set these to read only because we're only going to read that. But then the buffer we actually do write to, so leave that. Okay, and to schedule a job, it's also relatively simple. I mean, the main thing that you do is just create a new instance of the job, and then you pass any data to it. Like, we'll need to pass it the archetype and the buffer, but then you call the schedule, and the schedule class is what actually schedules the job to run at some other time. So for each job you have to pass the component system, because that's how Unity is able to get the entities, and then you pass in any input dependencies, and that means that Unity will only run this job once any job handles that you pass into it have also completed. Alright, so next thing we need to do is create the archetype and the buffer. To do that, we'll override this onCreate function, and so we need to... And this only runs once whenever the game starts up. So entity archetype. And this will just be the piece archetype. And then we also need to get the entity command buffer. So how you create an entity command buffer is you need to figure out what system you want to unroll the buffer, or rewind the buffer is what Unity calls it, at the after these jobs have finished. I'm going to do the begin. Okay. Also another thing. Alright, so I was going to say I'm going to do mine at the begin simulation phase, but how that works is that Unity kind of groups these systems into 3 groups: initialization, simulation, and presentation. And it pretty much corresponds to the start, update, and late update functions on old mono behaviors. So I want this to run before update, basically. So we'll do... First, let's get the archetype. So, was it entity manager? Yeah, I just went blank there. So we just pass the component type. It's just the piece, I think. And then, so we're not actually getting the buffer here, we're getting the buffer system. So to do that, we call the world, which contains all running systems until it gets existing system. So this will be a pre-simulation. Or begin simulation. Entity command buffer system. Okay, and so now we can just pass this archetype through to the job like that. And then for the buffer system, we'll actually create the buffer by just calling buffer system create command buffer, and then we have to convert it to the multi-threaded type. One other thing you have to do, so let's change this. So we need to store the dependencies from this worker, and then we have to tell the buffer system to not rewind until this job has completed, which we do by just passing it the dependencies from the schedule function. And then we also return those to Unity so we can pass them on to the next system. Okay, so yeah, that was that one. Yeah, so let's I know I just kind of dumped a lot of info. If you're new to the Unity entity system, it probably is it's a little daunting, but hopefully as I program more, it will be a little simpler to understand. Alright, so I think it's not going to actually, like, nothing's going to show up when we do this because we just create the piece entity. But I want to see if that works. Member name. Oh yeah, so we don't actually... Okay, well, we will use this later, I guess. Oh, actually we won't need to, so I think I'll just... I was gonna say I'll just delete it, but at some point later when we return a space to its start... Well, let's just delete it for now, we don't need it anymore at this point. We might use it later. Okay, 30 minutes left. I'm not sure if we'll be able to complete this in 2 hours, but that's alright. I'll just continue tomorrow. We'll definitely be able to do it then, because we're already about halfway there. The startup is always the slowest. Okay, anyway, so we got no errors, which is always a good sign. Oh, but it's creating infinite pieces, so let's stop that before it explodes my computer. Okay, so the reason that happened is because this is running every frame, which is something I should have seen coming. So basically, I only want this to run during when that initialization phase is active, which you can do that by basically this means that the system will only run when an entity with the initialization phase component exists. So now if I played, it actually would never run because we don't add this at all. So to do that, I'm just going to create subnet board game behavior. Oops, I didn't spell that right. And so this is basically just going to be another iConvert game object to entity object. Maybe I shouldn't do that. I think I'll just make it a basic mono behavior because it doesn't actually convert anything. And it's just going to initialize the game by adding that component to the command singleton. So this void awake. This is supposed to be a mono behavior. Let's do it on start. So this would be world. Oh, actually, no, I think that might be an issue. Okay, so we want to get the. You can have more than one world, but this project's always just going to have one, so we can just use this default world. And then we just want to tell it to add a component. Oh wait, no. So we got to do entity manager, add component, and then we have the command singleton entity, which is just a single entity that gets created at the start of the game that will have flow components on it. And then we'll just pass it, tell it to create or add that component to it. Alright, so now I guess we're not done yet because we need something to remove this phase when we're ready. Let's see. Okay, so to make things a little, I was just thinking about what I want to do. To make things a little simpler for me, I'm going to move this to the simulation system group. And this will actually run on the begin presentation. And then I want to have another object that will basically be, I don't know, this start turn phase watcher, which will basically see when we can enter the turn phase. So this is going to be a component system. And the difference between a component system and a job component system is one schedules job and the schedules jobs and the others doesn't. And the other doesn't. Alright. And in practice, it just means that Unity doesn't pass it a job handle. So I guess really all I want to do here is see if pieces have been created. And that's about it. We could do some other things to make sure there's not a bug. Maybe the user has to click with the mouse to start the game, but I'm not going to worry about that kind of input right now. So in order to do that, I'm going to get on create. I'm going to create something called an entity query, which basically looks at the entity system to see if any pieces exist. Or, yeah, it looks at the entity system to see if any entities exist with a certain component that you're looking at. And to do that, you just get entity query or call that. And we want it to have, oops, that was wrong. It needs to be capitalized. So we just want to look for entities that have a piece component. And then I'll tag this as required, which means that this update function will only run if this query has any entities in it. And then we'll also want to require the init phase. Okay, so if this works, then we can remove the initialization phase from the command singleton. Okay, and the component systems have their own like buffer built in, so you can just do it like this. So basically we want to remove the initialization phase from the command singleton entity. And then we'll want to add the turn phase to it, which won't actually do anything at this point, but it will at least get the piece spawner to stop running. Okay, and then we want this to update in the initialization system group. Oh yeah, I always forget that you have to pass it the type object instead of just the name. Okay, so I think now everything should, like, yes, the initialization phase will be added, and then it will create pieces, and then the phase watcher will see that it needs to switch over to the play phase. But let's make sure. Okay, no errors. That's always a good sign. Okay, and we can see here that there's only two pieces that exist. Player 1 on space 13, which... Oh, okay, that's not right. Let's see. Oh, yeah, it is. Okay. So yeah, this is using, I guess, programming indexes, which start at 0. So player ID 1 is actually player 2, and it starts at space 13, which is that one, which is right. And then this other one is player 0, starts at space 14, which is correct too. Okay, so now we created the space entities, but how do we create the mono behaviors so that they can actually show up? So we're going to need another system to do that. Let's see. I'll just call it piece model creator. And this will just be another component system. In the namespace game logic. Alright, so think for a bit there, and then we'll just implement the abstract class. Okay, so I have that piece, what did I call it? I thought I had an object that had like a list of pieces. Pretty sure I did make that. Oh, game piece registry. Yeah, which I actually haven't added here yet, so let's just go ahead and do that. Okay, so I want to get a reference to that. And I'm also going to use another entity query here. Okay, and since we're using a query, I'll also need to override the onCreate. So piece query equals get entity query. Okay, this one's going to be a little bit more involved. So entity query description, and we want this to have all types or all components of the piece. So yeah, component type. Alright, but we only want this to run for pieces that we haven't already created a model for. And to tell the system about that, I'm going to create a presented component, which just means that basically we've made the graphical object for this piece. So we want none that have the component type presented. Right. And then we'll, yeah, so we'll require this. So again, this will only update if there's some piece that has not been presented yet. So, okay, so what we want to do here is we want to get, oh yeah, I don't need to use private, but we want to get all the pieces in this query. And to do that, you can just call piece query to component data array, and this will give you a list of all the piece components for every entity in there. Okay, and then you also need to tell it how long you want this data to stick around for. And the temp job just means it's pretty much only going to be used for a frame or on one short job. But you might think that we're actually not using this for a job, so we could just use the temp key, which you could normally, but the to component data array uses a job in the background, so you have to use temp job. Other thing we need is we need to get the entities that correspond to the pieces so that we can add the presented tag to it. So to do that, it's to entity array, and then also just pass it same temp job. Okay, so first we need to create the correct game object for the different players, and in order to do that, I'm just gonna go ahead and add the prefabs here. So this will be player piece prefabs. We probably could be a little bit cleaner with this, but again, I'm running low on time. Let's see. So we have the pieces, and then we'll just need to add. Well, yeah, we need to have a way to link these back to the mono behavior. So I guess each piece needs to have an ID. Which I don't think I do that yet. Let's see. Yeah, components. Let's clean this up a little bit. So close that. Yeah, so the pieces only have a player and a space. So right now, I could just limit it to having one piece per player, but that seems kind of a shame because the code already supports more pieces so far. So I think the best way to do it is just to have an integer ID for the piece. I'd rather have this system not decide the piece ID. how would I... Let's see. So I'm trying to think. In order to have like a sequential ID here, we could either run the the board piece initialization system sequentially instead of in parallel, so we could increment the ID for each piece created, or we could just assign the ID separately in another job. I'm thinking that we'll just run this sequentially because it's like not going to cause an issue, because this is only running once at the beginning of the game, and it's only running for every starting space, which there's not going to be hundreds of. So let's see. So to do that, I think I could just call schedule single, which means it's just all going to run on one frame or one thread. So then let's see. Will it let me? I'm curious. I mean, I know another way that's kind of safer, but I already have this written. So I was wondering if I could just use... I don't know if this will work. And then I could just increment the counter. Yeah, I'm not sure if this will work. Let's... this is going to run a bunch and then complain to me that these arrays aren't getting disposed, so I'll go ahead and dispose them. Okay, also, I need to tell this to update in group type of presentation system group. Okay, and I think I might even just comment this out for now. We'll come back to it. I want to test to make sure that that ID thing works. If it doesn't, I know another way to do it, but the way we have it already is kind of clean and elegant, but let it compile real quick. Oh, interesting. So it didn't give me an error. Okay, so that did work. I wasn't sure if it would let me assign to the job structure within the job. Because usually you don't want to do that because you want to have jobs run in parallel, but since we're not running in parallel, that's fine. Not run this job parallel. Here also should probably put that comment right there. All right. Okay, so that's cool. Oops, sorry about that. So let's see if we can get these pieces to display, and then try and finish as much else as we can. But I have a feeling, unless I want to really half-ass the dice, that we're not going to be able to finish today, which is okay. It's not. This project is probably a little bigger than I should do on these 2-hour streams, so it's a learning experience for me. Let's... Oh, right. Okay, so we have the pieces, and then I want to set the ID. Oh, yeah, I closed everything. I want to set the ID for this list, or the index for the list to match the ID in the piece data. Is it really just pieces.pieces? Why is it not showing up? Oh, because I renamed this. So let's rename that to piece registry, which I don't even get a reference to yet. So in job systems, you still can use find object of type, which will just look in the Unity mono behaviors to find the piece it needs. You got to be a little bit careful about this if you have a game with multiple scenes, because you have to make sure this exists at the time when this system is created. But since we are just going to have one scene, it will work okay. So piece registry dot pieces. I guess I need to have a for loop here. 0i less than pieces dot length. So yeah, we'll create an object for each of these new pieces. Okay, so we want piece ID equals pieces I dot ID. Now, unfortunately, Unity doesn't have like a, or does it? Okay, it does have insert. I'm not sure. This might complain if the list isn't big enough to hold it. It's a little annoying, but we don't even have game object yet, so I'm just gonna type null in there so that to get rid of that syntax error. So first we have the prefab you can get out of the piece registry, and the index is the pieces player, and then the model is we're going to instantiate that prefab. And the position should be the position of the space that the piece is on, actually. But we might have another object that would handle that. Okay, well, let's just do it in here for now. So I'm also going to need to make sure that this has... Let's do something simple now. So we won't support rotation. This will just have a translation. So we want translations also. And this is added automatically by the Unity converter, or entity converter. Again, it has to be a temp job, and I need to remember to dispose of this down here. Okay, so yeah, we need to pass the position to instantiate here. Oh, actually, yeah, it's asking for the parent, which I guess will just be the registry. Let's just leave it at that, and then, oops, that's not what I wanted to do. We'll set the position to translations dot value, which is a float 3. Oh, Unity does automatically transform it to a vector 3. That's good to see. Okay, so that's set up. So now I just need to place the model in there. Okay, I think that's all I have to do. But we'll see if the list complains that it's too small when we try to insert it, which is a little annoying. I wish there was a way that you could tell a list to expand to fit an index, because that seems to be a use case that I use quite often. Maybe they want you to use a dictionary in that case, but you can just store it as a list. Alright, so let's just look and see what happens. Okay, so there's no errors, but also no pieces. And we are in the turn phase. Okay, well that's actually kind of good, because I just realized I forgot to add the presented tag to these entities, so it would have ran infinitely. Oh, maybe it's because these pieces don't have a translation. That's exactly why. Okay, but we'll fix that. What they actually need to do, yeah, we need to get a translation from the space. Yeah, so these, yeah, the piece won't have the translation. Okay, that's interesting. Figure out how to do that. Okay, so anyway, we want to add on the post update commands, we want to tell it to add a component to the entity for this piece. We want it to add the we want to add the presented tag to it. Okay, so now I need to figure out how to position. Well, first I guess let's make sure that the pieces spawn. I could just have a system that looks through and every frame positions every piece. I mean, that's kind of wasteful, but it might be okay. I mean, it won't let us do animations and things, so I don't know. I don't know if this game is going to have animations, but... It still didn't create the pieces. Let's see, so do I see in the presentation the piece? Oh, I got an error. Index was out of range, of course. Okay, so it was what I thought. Alright, so in order to get rid of this, I've created like extension methods so I could do it myself, but too lazy to worry about it right now. So you could just say while the index you want is greater than or equal to the size of the list, you can just add null to the list. There might be another way to do this. I don't know. I think a while ago I checked to see if there was some way, but okay. Now we don't really want to insert. We want to just set it because we don't want to extend the amount of nulls in the list. Yeah, if this is... Okay, so yeah, if it's equal to the count, then it's going to add one more so that the piece ID becomes less than the count, which means we could set it. So that is correct, and... Yeah, with whiles I'm always scared I'm going to get an infinite loop, but I think that one will be okay. Okay, so I still got an index out of range. Maybe... at line 37... or 31. Oh. Okay, so it wasn't even the error I had. Okay, well that still works. Yeah, I just assumed it was that issue. But it's actually because I forgot to assign the prefabs here. Another silly mistake, but... Okay, so player 1 piece and player 2 piece. Alright, so let's try this again. Yeah, also if anybody has any comments I've been wondering about this question. Do people like music on the streams or not? Because I've been thinking that sometimes when I listen to streams, I like to be able to put on my own music. So if you feel strongly either way, please let me know, because I'm trying to decide if I want to continue having music on my streams or just let other people play their own. Yeah, so please let me know in the comments. Okay, so yeah, this worked. I was trying to figure out why this was positioned different, but I think it's just because the prefabs are like that. So that one's... yeah, for some reason the player 1 piece is set back. Not a huge deal. Okay, so yeah, now I need to position the pieces. That's a little bit... or I need to be able to sync the model position. With the actual position of the piece. Boom. Yeah, we can't do it in a job because you can't interact with model behaviors in a job, so this will just have to be a component system. I'm trying to think the best way to do this. I mean, there's... the way I'm thinking of right now is definitely not the fastest way, because it's going to just update the position every frame. But I think it'll be okay because we don't really have very many pieces, so... okay, so we're going to need a query for pieces, and I can always make this simpler by just having some command entity that has to exist to be able to do this, but... so looks like we'll finish this up and then I'll have to call it a night. So it's a bit of a shame that we didn't actually get to the game, but probably we'll be able to finish it up tomorrow. And maybe this will just be what we do for the non Twitch card game project. And we'll just start back on via visual effects next week. Anyway, so yeah, we'll have a query for pieces, and then I'll need to have a query for spaces. So override on create. I probably could have, I mean, I almost definitely could have finished this project if I didn't do it as an entity component system, but I kind of want to make this... I know a lot of people are still learning it, so I thought it would be a nice idea to try to implement this using the component system, and also it gives me some good practice. Okay, so spaces, will need the space, and then also the translation, because we'll want to have the actual position in world space. Could support rotation now too. Oh, I just am now seeing that my frame rate or bit rate is dying. Looks like it's not letting up. So again, sorry any watchers that my the bit rate right now, it's been good all stream, but yeah, I guess I'm gonna have to stop it now. If you can hear me, thanks for coming by. We'll finish this up tomorrow, and I'm excited for the new year, and I'm gonna try really hard to stream full-time, so, or not full-time, but every day of the week. So thanks everybody for coming by. I'll put some links in chat if you're interested. I do have a Discord, also Twitter and YouTube, so if you're interested in any of that stuff, you can check me out there. And again, I think that's about it. So thanks everybody, and I'll see you tomorrow. Bye bye.